buying properties with when you have good credit and when you have bad credit.
That's awesome. Yep.
Always buy properties for 5%.
Yep.
Yes.
And then how do you live for free?
By renting every room and the upstairs and the garage.
Yep.
While living inside the downstairs room.
Good job.
So you're saying I should be charging my children rent?
Yes. and you should pay them labor because there's probably write-offs there.
Good point, good point.
So last week we learned how to buy a house. Today we're going to learn how to make $1 million. Just jump straight into that.
Cool.
They should have been for those.
He'll record it, so if he wants it online.
That's a bold statement.
But the most important part is we cannot buy ordinary properties. So what is an ordinary property?
Just a normal house.
Just a normal house, exactly. Yeah. So this house here, so we've got Home Church, where we are right now,
Yeah.
and then if you follow that road going that way, we've got this land right here. So my mom bought that in 2003, and we have a rule as a realtor that when we find a deal, we have to show it to people who are working with us before we can buy it ourselves. And so this person wanted an acreage, 5 minutes outside of town, for under $300,000.
Wow.
Remember, this is 2003, so prices were cheaper, like back when dinosaurs roamed the earth. But the funny thing is, interest rates were higher then, but yeah, I'll get to that. So it was 4 acres and really close to the highway. So I'm standing there and I go like, hey, look, you can see red deer. And so as we know, cities always expand. And so then eventually your land is gonna be housing. And so that would be future development land. Like all this back behind there, all that's gonna be housing. So her clients decided they didn't wanna see it. They didn't wanna be too close to the highway. Oh shucks. So we went and looked at it. There's a secret room in there, so we bought it. She put 10% down, so she put $27,000. And then she went, so 7 years later, the city said, hey, we need to expand the highway. So when they changed the highway over there, they said, we need to buy some of your land. So they did this overview of like, okay, we need to take this little sliver of your land, which is 1/3 of an acre. You'll be left with 3 acres still. And so they did an appraisal. It appraised at $1.5 million.
Wow.
But because we were living there, if you live in a house and it goes up in value, your primary residence is tax-free when you sell it. So there's no tax paid on that $1.2 million worth of profit. The crazy thing is she still owns it today.
Wow.
This was 2010. Because then what she did is she takes this appraisal for $1.5 million, she goes to the bank and says, my property's worth 1.5, can you give me a loan against that? Remember, she put $27,000 down. So the bank gave her $500,000, which she then used to go buy more real estate. And she still owns it, and then rents it out, and then the tenants pay for that $500,000 loan. Because when we moved in there, I think your payment was like $1,500 to live in that house. Now it's $3,000. So when we moved out, she put a tenant in there, and the value increased, there's more mortgage, so she just charges more rent. So if prices go up, rent also goes up. So it doesn't really matter what the price is, because it all inflates relatively at the same pace. So what do you see with this property? Because the first person that went to go look at that first property, they said, I see it's too close to the highway. And then we saw that it's future development land. So what do you guys see with this property here? This is Innisfail. You got the Dino Center right over here. So what eventually is gonna be on that land?
Housing.
Either housing or more road.
Yes. So she went to the city, my mom bought this property, there's an acreage right there, 6 acres, and it's just big rectangle. And so she went to the city because the neighbor bought this section right here. They came up with this subdivision plan. So basically, you put 44 houses, just picture one of these, plopped right there. And so got 44 lots approved on it. But then we actually just found out last week that, so there's a road right there, and that's how you get to the property. You could just take this little sliver and you can put a seniors assisted living complex on there. So seniors assisted living, they spend like $3,000 a month in rent because they have like care and things.
Right, yeah.
And so that land becomes very valuable. So she paid $241,000 for it. So she paid more than it was listed for, because there were 6 people bidding on it, including the town of Innisfail. Hey AJ.
It's Andre.
We're learning how to make $1 million. So when this property came on the market, there were 6 people bidding on it, and we have a way of winning bidding wars every single time. And so we just leave the purchase price blank, and then we go, we'll pay $5,000 more than anyone else. Up to whatever our maximum is. You don't want to have $1 million. So 2006, she bought this for $11,000 more than it was listed for, but she's looking at the future value of it, because this is not just an acreage.
Right.
This is future development, but you can live there, and then eventually the houses will be right there. You guys, Riverside Meadows, got mustard seed down there. So this is in Riverside Meadows. This was a 4-plex, and I was going to live in one of the units, buy it for 5% down, rent out the other 3 spaces, live for free. But we're standing there, and my mom goes, hey, look, there's extra land on this lot. You could subdivide that off, sell that, and then the profit you'd make from that would actually give you your 5% back. So you'd have nothing into this thing. To do subdivision, you have to present a plan to the city, and the city goes yes or no. And so it's not guaranteed. They could say no for whatever reason. I ended up buying something else because I found out you can't buy 4-plexes for 5% down anymore. It has to be 10% down. Still pretty sweet. So yeah, you could spend a bunch of money to subdivide it. It was gonna be like $70,000 to do this whole thing, but then the lot was gonna be worth $150. Spend 70, make 80. And it's funny because when I pull up this picture, there's a bulldozer right there. So someone is doing this subdivision. And then Sylvan Lake, you guys will have to bug Andrew about this, because Andrew was gonna buy this one, but he ended up not buying it. Like, hey, remember that place in Sylvan Lake you were gonna buy? Make $100,000. So you've got a house here, and then if I zoom out, you've got like the pier right here. So the lake is right there. And it was a house, $315,000. It was ugly. But what do we see here? So we've got 47th Street on this side, we've got 46th Street on this side, and the lot spans the entire length. So it's got a driveway. You could drive in on either side of the lot. And so when we're looking at properties, we always want to look down the street, because the neighbor might have done the perfect strategy on this property. So what did he do? He just drew a line down the middle of his property, put a house on this side and a house on that side. And so Andrew gets it under contract. He says, okay, I'm gonna buy this house, we're gonna live in it, we're gonna subdivide it. He does an inspection. So whenever we go to buy a house, we want a property inspector to check everything out in case there's leaks, or in this case, there was a crack in the foundation that you literally could put your arm through. So this is gonna be the first house that Andrew was gonna buy. He's like, hey Bryce, it's got a crack in the foundation. I've heard that's bad. So he ended up not buying it. But that house, so he was gonna pay $315,000 for the whole thing. That house sold for $370,000, and this lot is for sale for $235,000.
Oh my gosh.
So he would have made $150,000 plus on it. And then how do we find out if something is subdividable? There's surveyors, and they can just look at the city rules and go, yep, you can fit a house on this, because
I have a friend that can do that.
perfect, yeah. Good to have friends. Now we were gonna talk about how to buy a house for $5,000 and how to buy a house for $1,000. So my wife comes downstairs one morning. She says, I was talking to the Lord, and we should do seller financing. I'm like, okay, seller financing is great, but what house are you talking about? She goes, you've got a house for sale in Parkville. I think we should do seller financing on it. And I'm like, okay, well, they haven't said that they'd be willing to do that. If they were, what would you want to offer them? She says, I want to offer them $5,000, and I want them to play banker for me for 5 years. And I'll explain what that means. And so we bought this thing, and so I call the seller, and I go, hey, we would like to do seller financing on your property. Is this something you'd like to do? They're like, yeah, sure. So this is the world's best rent zone. It was definitely a word of knowledge. So we bought this place for $5,000. We spent $100,000 renovating it. We spent $15,000 for decor. I borrowed all this money. I borrowed the $5,000. I borrowed the $100,000. None of it's my money. And I'll have made $35,000. And then while we're doing the renovations, it obviously takes time. And so during that time, you have costs. You've got utilities because you have to have the lights on. You've got water because they have to use the bathroom. So there's just costs. There's cost to borrowing the money. So I just build that into the numbers. So I had to borrow an extra $10,000 to pay for these costs. So I borrowed a total of $130,000. This is what it looked like before the hoarders lived there. So picture a chop shop with bikes. That's what the house actually looked like. But what I want to show you is what we did to the design, because you come in the front door and you're hit by a closet. And on the other side of the closet, you've got a living room. So the plan was tear that closet out, make it nice and open. But when we were doing that, the roof started coming apart. So I always budget for, I call it my oh crap fund. Oh crap, what the hell else can happen? So we had to replace the ceiling, but then it looked really nice. So Dennis Lease actually did all the work. Noah's dead. So I spent $100,000 doing the renovations. How much of my time do you think it took to do all this? It took 4 months for the contractor to be there doing all the work. How many hours do you think it took me? 0?
1?
1 hour?
I don't know.
I went there 3 times. You just bring him coffee, go give him a pat on the back. You're doing a good job, thanks. And so on the living room, you've got this other wall here. The plan was tear that wall out, get rid of this weird pony wall that goes over the top, and then turn this window into a patio door because there's a park out back. And so the plan was to Airbnb it. So we had that, had another oh crap. There was something called asbestos, which is, the government came up with it. They're like, oh, this is a great way to insulate your home. Oh, this causes cancer. Sorry, guys. So whenever you cut into it and the dust flies out, the contractor always checks it beforehand to find out if there's asbestos, and he found out there was. I didn't know there was to begin, so that was an extra cost that we didn't account for. But this is what it looks like now.
Wow, it's beautiful.
That's crazy. So we put it on Airbnb. It rents for like $3,500 a month on Airbnb. But what are my costs? Because remember, I borrowed all the money. So we paid full price because the seller's playing banker for us, so we don't really have a lot of negotiation strength. It's not like, hey, here's cash. It's like, no, here's $5,000 bucks. You carry the rest of it for me. So we gave them $5,000, and then they're gonna play banker for us for 5 years. So within 5 years, I have to pay them that $244,000 because I've already given them $5,000. In the meantime, my commit's $1,200, but I'm collecting $3,500. That's pretty sweet. The mortgage stays in their name, so that's just an interest-only payment. I'm not getting. Remember how when you pay your mortgage, you pay it off every month. In this case, it's just interest only. And then, yeah, they have equity in there. So my cash flow is about $1,400 because I borrowed that $130,000 to do the renovations. I have a cost on that as well. But so I'm paying $1,200 and then another $700. So I'm in it for $1,900. I pay utilities. That's $500. So I'm at $2,300. But I'm bringing in $3,500. So I'm making $1,200 a month cash flow. So that's a little bit off. But it's none of my money. It's all borrowed.
Right.
Yeah.
Bryce, sorry, can I interrupt? How did you say that you're making $3,500?
We have it on Airbnb, so my wife manages it, and we've got 3 Airbnbs in Red Deer.
Okay, so this property that you bought with seller financing, you've turned into an Airbnb.
Yep.
Okay.
And so I don't have the value of it, but so we bought it for $250. We put $130,000 into it. So how much am I into it for total? I'm in it for I'm in it for 380. The property is now worth 400,000. So I've created $20,000 worth of equity. And so when I go to buy the place, I can actually use that equity as my down payment. Created free money out of thin air and use it as my down payment. So Andrew did that. So Andrew bought this house. This house has a basement suite and it's got a garage at the back. He bought it for $279,000. He did the renovations for $25,000. Andrew's a very good negotiator. When he talks with his contractors, he gets really good prices. So he did $25,000 worth of renovations. After he was done his renovations, that's what it appraised for, $355,000. But what does he have into it?
Not 355.
304,000. So he has created $51,000 out of thin air, just because he saw something and he saw what it could be, and then he asked me, he's like, what would it be worth after I do the renovations? I'm like, oh, it's gonna be worth this. I actually thought it'd be worth more. So he creates $51,000 worth of equity. Now he's not going to live in this. If he was going to live in it, he would have his down payment already, because he would just need 5% of $304,000, which is $15,000. He'd have well more than his down payment. He's turning it into a rental. Whenever we're buying a rental, it has to be 20% down. So in this case, 20% of that is those two added together, which is $59,100. So he bought this house for $8,100, and he rents it out. He makes $700 a month cash flow. And he did all this renovation and everything in 30 days. He got possession September 1st, he had his contractors go in September 2nd, did all the work, and then got a new appraisal for $355, and then, so he owns this thing, and then he put tenants in there right away. So he makes $700 a month off his $8,100 investment. What's 700 times 12? Like 8,000. So in 1 year, the property gives his down payment back, just from the cash flow. Yeah. So this method is called BRRRR, where you buy something, you renovate it, because that increases the value, and then you rent it out. Because the property is nice, new, and pretty, because you just did all these renovations, do you think it's gonna rent? Do you think an ugly house is gonna rent for more, or a nice, new, pretty house is gonna rent for more? Yeah. And so because we can get more rent, and it's nice, new, and pretty, our appraisal comes in for more than we paid for it. And so then we go to the bank and we refinance, which is the last R. Actually, there's one more R. Because when he bought this, he had to put a down payment in there. So he had to put 50,000 down. So he puts 50,000 down. But when he goes to the bank and gets his new appraisal, he actually gets that $50,000 back. He just has to leave a little bit in there. So the last R is called repeat. Because if I buy something and I get all my money back, I can use that money again to go buy another house. So I bought a house for $1,000.
These intros are always crazy.
Legally suited, so this is 17 Wishart Street over in West Park. Someone came to me and they said, I've got 5 properties. I will sell them all for $5,000. Sweet. It's tough when I have this rule where it's like, if someone's working with me, I have to show it to you before I can buy it myself. And that day I was like, oh no, I would like to buy all 5 of those. Sold 4 of them in like 24 hours. But this one was weird because you came downstairs. It was a half duplex. So you came downstairs to get to the shared laundry, and you had to walk past their living room, their kitchen, their bathroom, and their bedroom to get to the shared laundry, which is weird. So it took a while to sell, smelled like smoke, needed new flooring. And so I said to the person, well, instead of $5,000, I have to do new flooring. Can I give you $1,000? Because I have to spend money fixing the floors. And they're like, yeah, that's reasonable. I'm like, okay, thanks for doing seller financing. So I paid them full price because they're selling it to me for $1,000. So I wasn't gonna negotiate with them on the price because I'm just happy that they're doing that. They said, you have 2 years to pay out the full amount. So how do we pay the full amount out? We go to the bank and we get a mortgage. In this case, you could move into it. You could buy it for 5% down. you just have 2 years to kind of orchestrate that. In the meantime, I had to pay them just like I would have to pay a bank. I have to make my payment to them. So I'm paying $1,650 a month. That's my mortgage, my property taxes, and my property insurance. And then every month I paid off that mortgage. So I got about a $10,000 credit towards me. That just reduces the purchase price in the future. But I didn't live there. I just rented it out. So I rented out the upstairs for $1,250. I rented out the basement for $900. And then I paid the utilities. So I cash flowed $100 a month, which is like in 12 months I get $1,200. So I get my down payment back. So worst case scenario, after 1 year, if I had to walk away, I made $200. But I ended up buying it because it was a good property. But how do we buy properties if we don't have a job? There's something where the property qualifies for itself. If it makes enough money, the property just qualifies for itself. And it has to have, it's called a 1.25 coverage ratio. So if your expenses are $1,000, so your mortgage, your taxes, your insurance, that's $1,000. If it brings in $1,250 in rent, it makes enough to qualify for itself. And I could be homeless and the property would qualify for itself. I'd have to have the down payment, but if I could do seller financing, skip the bank, renovate it, create my down payment, and then go to the service credit union and have the property qualify for itself. People typically do that with apartment buildings. You guys will have to ask Andrew how he made almost made $1 million buying an apartment building. So I'll tell you about that one because we're gonna get some time. So he was going to buy a 30-unit apartment building. Each unit was worth $100,000. Last year, our rents increased by 30%. So this property was bringing in $300,000 worth of income. Apartment buildings, the value is based on how much income they bring in. So if I've got 30 doors and it's bringing in $300,000 worth of income, the building is worth $3 million. So he was going to buy it for $3 million. Okay. But rents increased by 30%. So it was bringing in $300,000 worth of income. But if we add 30% on that, it was going to bring in $390,000 worth of income. That changes the value because apartment buildings, the value is based on how much income it brings in. So if I can increase the income, it increases the value of the property. So it's going to increase the value of the property by $900,000. That's your down payment because you just need $900,000, more than enough for your down payment. And so you buy it, increase the rents, increases the value, and then you go to the bank and say, hey, this property is worth $3.9 million. Can you give me a mortgage on it? Yeah. And then they'll use that as your down payment. He was going to do it again with a 19-unit building. So he's going to buy a 19-unit building. He was actually it was bringing in, he was going to pay $109,000 per door.
But like, how do you initially get that property? Because you say that he has it, and then it increased in value.
So to buy the first one, he was going to need $650,000 to buy it. But if I went to you and I said, hey, I've got this property, we're going to make $900,000. Do you want to partner with me? You bring the money, I found the deal. And so he went to 12 people that he knew and he said, hey, I've got this property, we're gonna make almost $1 million. Do you wanna partner with me on it? And so he ended up raising $650,000 just by going to people he knows and explaining them the deal. And so he was going to use none of his money. He got all this from 4 different people. It doesn't have to be from one person. And then they were going to split the property, the profit 50-50. So your investor would get their $650,000 back when you sell the property, and they would also get half the profit. So they would get $450,000. Andrew was going to get $450,000 using none of his money. Yeah, because there's three parts to every deal. There's the money, there's the people, so the property manager, the realtor, the contractor, the accountant, and then there's the deal. And arguably the most important part is the deal. Because if you find something that's gonna make $1 million, we can find money for that. And so like rents always increase. AJ, there was a property, my mom bought it for $270,000, and in 7 years it increased by $1.2 million. So everything always goes up. There's no 1 cent candies, there's no 5 cent candies, they're 10 cent candies. We don't even have a penny anymore. So rents always go up. But interest rates used to be 24%. Now they're 4%. And so if you wanted to go buy a property 25 years ago, your payment is $1,200 because you're paying so much in interest. But if I go buy a property today, instead of paying 24% interest, I'm paying 4% interest. So what's my payment? $1,200. So your payment basically stays the same because it's called inflation and deflation. So when we print more money, so the government during COVID, they printed billions and billions and billions of dollars. And what does that do to our dollar? Reduces the value. Yeah, devalues it. And so that's why properties increase. So people will complain, they're like, oh, my kids will never be able to buy a house. Like it's the exact same difficulty to buy a house today as it was 25 years ago.
Mm.
Just the dollar looks higher, but also minimum wage used to be $5. Now it's $15. So it makes sense that the value of property tripled because everything else tripled. You're making three times as much. So yeah, it really doesn't matter what the dollar is because everything inflates. Do you have questions about anything that we've talked about last week, this week? Random things you thought about?
What would be the best way to go about like buying an apartment building if you don't have those connections?
If you don't have those connections, probably learning what the deal looks like. And then, so there's something called the 1% rule.
Yeah.
And so if a property brings in $100,000, so say you've got 10 units, each are renting for $1,000, you're getting $10,000 a month, which is actually $120,000. But let's just say it brought in 100,000. It's worth $1 million. If it brings in 200,000, it's worth 2 million. Brings in 300,000, worth 3 million. Brings in 500,000, worth 5 million. So we can evaluate a property just using that. It's a really conservative approach. It's actually probably worth more if it brings in that. In Red Deer, other cities are a little bit different. But yeah, learning what a deal looks like, and then keeping your ears open for if someone says, hey, you know, I'm interested in buying real estate. If you come across a deal, you should let me know. People will say that if you're talking about real estate. Yeah. Andrew posted on social media and 12 people reached out to him. AJ?
I actually have 2 questions. So you said that Andrew got that by like 4 different people?
Yep.
So did he split it with all 4 people?
Yes. One guy had 15%, one guy had 12%, one guy had.
Okay. And then on the one side you said you borrowed like 130,000. Did you have to pay that all back?
I will. I have time to pay it back. So I have 5 years to pay it back. Because I own the house next door to that one, and I had equity in there.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went to an investor and I said, hey, can you loan against my equity? He's like, yeah, sure. So I've got this house. So I've got the house, and I've got $120,000 worth of equity, because I bought this house when I was 18. My dad partnered with me, he gave me 5%. And so just over time, the value of the property goes up,
Mm-hmm.
and I pay the mortgage down. So I've got $120,000 in there. I've got a mortgage of 200,000 already. And so I said to the investor, I said, hey, I've got $120,000 in there. Do you want to lend against this? He's like, yeah, sure. So I went to him and he gave me $65,000. And then he registers that as a mortgage on my property. So I've got a $200,000 mortgage and I've got a $65,000 mortgage. And then I make a payment to him every month for $580, which actually goes to his RRSPs. Andrew explained RRSPs. So I pay him $580 a month to borrow that money. And then I use a line of credit to get the rest of the money. So I borrowed $30,000 on a line of credit. This isn't attached to my property, so if I sell this, the only thing I have to pay back would be that. This $30,000 is like a credit card, basically a line of credit. And so that's how I borrowed the money to do the renovations. There's another strategy where if you're buying a house and you're gonna do the renovations, the bank will give you $200,000. Let's say it's a $300,000 house, the bank will give you $200,000. I go to that same investor, he has 120 grand. I can say, hey, do you wanna lend me the other 100,000? Sure. So he puts another mortgage. This guy's in first, this guy's in second. And so if I died, what happens? Who gets their money first? The bank would get their money first because they're in first position, and because they have less risk, because they'll get their money back because it's worth 300,000, they charge me only 4% interest. But this guy, I'm paying him 10.5% interest because he's in second position, so it's riskier. Because if I die tomorrow and the house is only worth 300,000, but the highest offer they get is 290,000, well, he gets his 200, but there's only 90,000 left over. So it's more risky for him, which is why he charges more interest. You could even borrow the renovation. Let's say we're gonna do a renovation on that as well, because in this case, I just borrowed enough money to buy it. But if I was gonna do a flip, and I need $60,000 to do the renovations, I can ask that investor, a different investor, I can say, hey, can you lend me $60,000? You'll be in third position because it's riskier. I'll give you 18% interest. My property, when I'm done the renovation, it's gonna be worth $450,000. So he's actually lending against the future value of the property. He's not lending on today's value. Good question.
So real estate is mostly just all about like connections and networking.
Yeah, once you get past buying like the properties for 5% down, then you have to get creative. Like there's some people that have the money and they're just buying it themselves. Because if I had the $360,000 to do the flip, I wouldn't have to go to an investor and borrow it, and then I'm saving the interest on this. But to me, the interest doesn't matter, because if I'm paying 10% interest on that, it's like $500 a month. So if I can flip this thing in 4 months, it costs me $2,000 in interest. It's like, is it even worth using my own money to do it? Because I could use other people's money. Whenever I do a flip, I want to make 30,000.
How many properties do you flip a year?
I usually keep them.
Okay.
So I do the strategy where you buy it, you renovate it, and then if I was gonna make $30,000, I have to pay the realtor out of that. So maybe the realtor gets paid $20,000. But if I don't sell it, I have $50,000, which can go towards my down payment. And so then I buy a single family house and I put a basement suite in there. That's how I flip them. But then I keep them because they're gonna cash flow $700 a month.
Right.
And I've created $50,000 worth of my down payment. I did an interview with a flipper. He had done 200 flips, and he said if I just kept the first 10, I would have made the same amount, because appreciation, mortgage pay down, and cash flow. He's like, was it worth doing 200 flips over 20 years? He's like, it was a lot of work, a lot of stress.
That is a lot of work. So you think the best way to flip a property is to buy it, add a basement suite, keep it, rent it out, and then have it forever.
It is the best.
How long will they take to pay back all those loans?
You can ask for whatever you want. So on this one, I said, hey, can I borrow it for 5 years? Because on the house, we're doing seller financing for 5 years, so I just kind of matched it up. Normally when you go to a bank, they give you a mortgage for 5 years, and then they just send you a letter in the mail saying, hey, would you like to stay on for another 5 years? But when I go to a seller, at the end of 5 years, they usually don't want to stay on for longer, so I need an exit plan. So our exit plan is increasing the value, going to the bank, and
Then changing from the seller to the bank.
And do you wait the full 5 years to get the mortgage from the bank?
We're actually in the process of refinancing it right now. So I should have it done soon, so it'll basically be just about a year.
Okay. So you use them with seller financing, and then as soon as you have it done, ready, it's rented, then you go to the bank and switch it over.
I just wanted that extra time in case, because at the time, I was like, I think I need 5 years to qualify, because I had a bunch of other stuff going on. But then all that got cleared up, and so it's like, oh, let's do this now.
Nice.
Do we have questions from the audience?
You do. I'm just wondering, with it being a seller's market, you were talking about the properties, like the one in Sylvan Lake, and other properties that you could buy, subdivide, and all that sort of stuff. To get financing for something that creative, sometimes it needs time. How can you do that in a seller's market when you've got multiple bids on a house and the house sells in less than 24 hours?
Yeah, great question. So I use something, I win multiple offers every time without overpaying, using something called an escalation clause. So it just means incremental. So I leave the purchase price blank. And then at the bottom of the offer, I say, I will pay $5,000 more than any other offer you get. But I've already done my math, and I know this property is worth this much, and I know I can pay this much. And so if the property is for sale for $235,000, I'll say I'll pay up to $260,000, but I'll pay $5,000 more than anyone else. So if the highest offer is only $235,000, I only have to pay $240,000. I was willing to pay $260,000, so I actually got it for $20,000 cheaper than my numbers allowed.
Okay, so you just write an escalation clause into the offer?
Yeah.
Okay, because it's brutal out there right now.
Oh, it's crazy. We just sold a house.
Do you find there's no inventory right now too?
Yeah, typically we have 4 months worth of inventory, so usually there's like 120 houses you can buy. But we have 1 month worth of inventory, so there's 30 you can choose from.
Wow.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Wow.
Yeah.
So
It is
are
nuts.
people just
I know,
not wanting to
there's
sell right
nothing
now?
up here in Edmonton or Leduc either.
Yeah, people are not wanting to sell. We had 4,000 people move to Red Deer. We did not build 4,000 houses, but that's all across Alberta. Like, we just had mass migration here.
It's all across Canada.
Yeah, which is why the government came out with this crazy rule where you can build apartment buildings for free.
Wow.
What?
Yeah.
How does that work?
Want to learn how to build an apartment building for free?
Yes.
Yeah, there's one way to
Yes.
on my house right now.
Where do you live?
Timberlands,
Timberlands, yeah.
the one by the pizza.
That's awesome. Oh, right, yeah, that's at your house. So the government says, hey, we need housing. And if you are wealthy enough, so they have a net worth requirement, if you're wealthy enough, we'll give you 100% financing to build apartment buildings. So I can go build
How wealthy do you have to be?
I'm feeling pretty wealthy.
And the great thing is, it doesn't even have to be our wealth. We could use a partner.
Right.
So it's like, hey, we come across a deal. It's like, hey, can we show the bank your bank statement and get 100% financing? So you have to have a 25% net worth. So if it's $1 million property, you have to have a net worth of $250,000. And so that could be stocks, bonds.
Totally.
Yeah.
So if you had like 6 investors, the 6 of you could have that 25%.
And so with new construction, they also have a 10% liquidity. So our net worth, so that could be our house.
Yeah.
It could be gold bars buried in the backyard. I know someone with a gold bar buried in the backyard.
What?
And then the 10% liquidity. So that means like cash. It could be stocks, anything that I can basically get access to in a day. You have to have 10%. So you'd have to have $100,000 in liquid. And so then how it works is the government says, okay, give me 5% down. So 50 grand. So give me 5% down to build this apartment building. After it's built and fully rented out, we will give you that $50,000 back.
Cool.
That's nice of them. And they'll give you, like when I go to buy a house, remember I was saying if you get a 15-year mortgage, your payment's more, but you pay it off in 15 years. Most mortgages are 25 years. With this, it's a 50-year mortgage. And so why did they do that? Because it's way too expensive to build apartment buildings. And so they said, well, what if we just make the payment cheaper? Spread it over 50 years. Imagine buying a car and having to pay on it for 50 years. Your payment would be like $100.
You have to pay so much interest.
Pay so much interest. Yeah. But it's free and it cash flows. And the great thing about new apartment buildings is you have warranty. So if your fridge breaks, it's under warranty. If a window falls out, it's under warranty. So you don't have any maintenance for 10 years. So your payment's higher, but you don't have, I call older houses puzzle houses. You guys probably don't like puzzles, but if you've ever borrowed a puzzle from a friend, you probably like puzzles. If you borrowed a puzzle from a friend, you get to the end of it and you go, one of their kids ate one of the pieces. It's just not there, I can't finish it. Older houses are like puzzle houses. There's a piece missing, and so the price is cheaper, and so our cash flow is higher, but there's a piece missing. Maybe I have to replace the furnace. Maybe I have to replace a window. Your cash flow is about the same, because in the older houses I have to save my money to replace things. In the newer ones, I have warranty for 10 years. I don't have to save that cash flow. So it usually works out about the same. It's just a difference of buying something for $300,000 and buying something for $1 million. But if appreciation affects everything equally, do you want 10% appreciation on $300,000? Or do you want 10% appreciation on $1 million?
Bryce, did you say the new home warranty is 10 years?
10 years on major structural, electrical, and plumbing. The first year is anything, basically like if a nail pops out of the wall, they'll come and fix the drywall and they'll paint it and make it all flush. And then 5 years is kind of the next level after that.
Okay.
So Bryce, why wouldn't you just like, because you see property value increases over time, right? So like say in 1 year, this apartment's now worth $1.5 million.
Okay.
Why wouldn't you just sell it? And like, wouldn't you make $500,000 on that?
Yeah.
And then you can use that money to then put into other properties.
So this is what I would do. So if it increased by 500,000, I can go to the bank and I can say, hey, can you give me a new mortgage on it? Because my value's increased. And so they'll say, yeah, I'll give you 80% of the new value. So they'll give me 1.2 million as a new mortgage. When you bought it, you had to put a down payment on there, so you probably had to put 200,000. But I have a new mortgage. So really my mortgage is only 800,000 on this one, but they gave me a new mortgage for 1.2 million. So I actually get a check for 400,000. So I could just take that money out and I could use it as a down payment to buy another property.
While still keeping the apartment.
While still keeping the
And
property.
still making money.
And still making money.
Mm.
historically, the Jewish people, you've heard of buy low, sell high. They just buy low. And they just keep.
So you never wanna sell is what you're saying?
Ideally, you never wanna sell, unless, cause I would get more money if I did sell it, cause I still have like 300,000 locked up in there. So if I could get something really cool for 700,000, then it might be worth it to sell it. It just depends what you're gonna do with the money.
Well, and if it already went up to 1.5, if you kept it, the chances are it'll move up again.
Historically, red deer over the last 100 years has appreciated at 7% a year. So 70,000 year one, 70,000 year two, 70,000. So,
You wanna keep it. So like, for like putting up apartment buildings and how like are missing free, so like would you wanna put in like areas that would be like close to like plazas or schools?
yeah, that'd be location. The better the location, the more it will appreciate in value.
I feel like there's a couple of good locations that I know about too. That would be really good.
So
Right now it's farmland.
how do you buy, like, would you have to buy farmland or something like that to be able to build an apartment? Cause the city doesn't have lots that size, so how does
Honestly,
that
I
work?
feel like they do, because in like Timberland area, there was just a giant empty lot
Right,
that was just sitting there.
so does the city of Red Deer like zone so many areas in each subdivision to be apartments and then they just wait for someone to buy an apartment lot?
Yes, so Timberland is a good example. The city of Red Deer owns Timberland, so they bought it from a farmer and they developed it.
Mhm.
And then they said, we've got a couple spaces where you can build the apartment building, and so then they sold those. Usually there's companies that buy the land and they develop it, and it's usually not the city, and so then usually the developer keeps
Right.
the best part for themselves, which is the apartment building land, because that's the hardest part, is getting the land. There's Edmonton, they made this crazy rule. Any lot, you can build an apartment building on. So like you could tear your neighbor down, and if there's enough space, you can build an apartment building on it. So, but, Red Deer, it's a lot harder. So there's one downtown, you guys know where the co-op is?
Mhm.
Or where it used to be, by Lindsay River. So there's a lot, it's 100 feet by 200 feet. And so it's 10,000 square feet of lot. There's a house on this side that has tenants in it. There's a house on this side that's all boarded up and you can't get inside of it. You've got apartment building here and you've got an apartment building here. So if I go to the city and I go, look, my neighbors are apartment buildings. Can I tear these houses down and build an apartment building? The city's gonna go, yes, that makes sense. And it's already zoned, cause like my house is zoned for a house. These are zoned for apartment buildings. But we can change the zoning too, so if it was a house, we can change it from a house to an apartment building.
Give it enough space.
If you have enough space and if it fits the area, like they don't wanna drive down the street and go, it's like, oh, there's a 7-Eleven in the middle of the subdivision. You can't. So it has to be, it has to fit the look of the neighborhood.
But like even if you drive around, I've seen that there's a lot of like empty lots around like neighborhoods, or random neighborhoods, and you're like, okay, why is there just a big empty lot?
Yeah, like next to where Pastor Aaron's house is, you've got that like cool apartment building when you're driving to her house. There's that like cool apartment building on the left. There's that empty space there, so that's zoned for an apartment building.
It's just that no one's bought it yet.
Yeah, and the reason why no one bought it is because I used to have to go and get a mortgage, and I could only get like a maybe a 30 year, maybe a 40-year mortgage. So the government said, hey, let's make it cheaper for people to build. And so until a year and a half ago or 2 years ago, it really wasn't feasible to build them because it's just so expensive. But now they're like, oh, let's spread this payment out, make it cheaper.
So if in the case of an apartment building, a 50-year mortgage is a good thing?
It depends on people's risk tolerance.
Okay.
To me, I think amortizing it as long as possible is great. Other people would disagree. Some people want to pay their house off as fast as possible.
Mhm.
In my mind, I'm like, okay, I have this at 4% interest. I could, if I was gonna pay my house off, say my house is 300,000, I could give that 300,000 to an investor and make 8, 9, or 10%. Why am I investing it at 4%? So yeah, to me, it's like, I don't make extra payments on my mortgage. I take that money and I save it in a bank account so I can get another 5% and buy another house. Because once it's in your house, it's hard to get out.
Right. Unless you sell your house.
Or refinance it.
Okay.
Cool. Thanks for listening.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
I feel so much smarter.